The reality is that the US president has started an illegal war. He has announced that he has won that war, and yet is now backpedaling and asking others to come and help. He's trying not to be a policeman. He's trying and continuing to be a global bully. And the only person who's brought instability to the Middle East, only two people, are Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump, because Donald Trump was gullible enough to follow the plan that Benjamin Netanyahu has wanted to exercise for the last 30 years. And I hate to say it, but the only beneficiary of this is Vladimir Putin, who appears to have sanctions lifted and appears to be getting ever deeper pockets. So I'm somewhat bemused and angry at the position taken by the gentleman who seeks to lecture us on these issues, when what he should be doing is turning his fire internally and telling his president to get around the table and to get a diplomatic solution.
Ever notice how some political figures sound unstoppable right up until they're actually challenged? Because the moment real pushback shows up, the confidence starts to crack. And that's exactly what's about to happen here. Before we dive into the full story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. There's something almost predictable at this point. You get a MAGA commentator stepping onto international television, especially UK television, and suddenly the tone shifts. The talking points that might slide by unchallenged elsewhere, they don't land the same way. The questions get sharper, the interruptions get fewer, and the pressure gets very real, very fast. And what happens next? More often than not, they struggle. Not because they don't have opinions, because they're not used to being seriously challenged on them. It really raises a bigger question about media environments. Are certain voices in the US being handled too gently? Are hosts letting statements slide that should be pushed on harder? Because when those same arguments are tested outside that bubble, the contrast is hard to ignore. In this clip, that exact dynamic plays out in real time. You've got the leader of the SNP in the United Kingdom stepping in, not to shout, not to grandstand, but to methodically press a former Trump assistant on his claims. And as the conversation unfolds, you can actually watch the shift happen. The confidence starts to wobble, the answers get less precise, and the cracks begin to show. It's not just a debate, it's a stress test. So what we're going to do is watch this clip all the way through, break down what's really being said, and then I'll give you the full picture, context, analysis, and what this moment says about the bigger political landscape. Let's dive into it.
I think degrading Iran's capability of destabilizing the region and the world, wiping out its nuclear program, a missile program that could soon hit the UK with nuclear weapons, is certainly in the interest of the UK. That's why I wish the UK was with us on this. We're also creating an historic opportunity. I don't know what's going to happen for the Iranian people to overthrow this terrible regime. And with death of Ali Rajani overnight, the head of Iran security services, one of the leading hawks in the country, is really increasing the possibility that the Iranian people may be able to take back their country.
Stephen, what do you say to that?
I'm somewhat bemused by what I'm listening to, because if you're seeking to liberate people, I don't think that involves blowing up a primary school with little kids inside of it. I don't think that means destroying all the civilian infrastructure, including desalination plants, which are crucial for people to have access to safe drinking water. The reality is that the US president has started an illegal war. He has announced that he has won that war, and yet is now backpedaling and asking others to come and help. He's trying not to be a policeman. He's trying and continuing to be a global bully. And the only person who's brought instability to the Middle East, only two people, are Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump, because Donald Trump was gullible enough to follow the plan that Benjamin Netanyahu has wanted to exercise for the last 30 years. And I hate to say it, but the only beneficiary of this is Vladimir Putin, who appears to have sanctions lifted and appears to be getting ever deeper pockets. So I'm somewhat bemused and angry at the position taken by the gentleman who seeks to lecture us on these issues, when what he should be doing is turning his fire internally and telling his president to get around the table and to get a diplomatic solution.
Fred?
Oh, a diplomatic solution with the Iranians. They haven't negotiated in good faith in decades. But look, I'll concede, if this war killed children at a school, I think that's a tragedy, and the U.S. has to investigate that.
It's not a tragedy, it's a war crime.
Well, look, we know horrible things happen in war, and I hope that didn't happen. I hope the U.S. wasn't responsible. But you're welcome to pick at the mistakes made in this war. You know, things are going to be made like this. But who's responsible for this? Iran's Islamist regime that's been pursuing nuclear weapons, that has been sending assassination squads through Europe, including in the UK. And I think the Iranian diaspora that has been celebrating this operation in the UK has a different opinion.
You can agree that the IRGC are terrorists and appalling without agreeing that the president's actions were proportionate and deserved. Killing children is a war crime and your government should apologise.
And with respect to what Stephen's been putting forward there, you've also got to recognise the importance of Britain's military capability and the ability that we have to defend our interests in the region, which if we were to follow your party's principles, we would not be able to do that.
Sorry, what are you doing in the region just now? How many vessels have you got there?
So look, I think
we've got.
Tell me how many.
But what would be your so your position on Trident, for example, your decision recently?
Is Trident in the Middle East? I'm confused.
But more the
No, it's not.
nuclear capability is very, very important in defending British interests, and the SNP would have us completely remove ourselves from that.
we've showed up late. The government has been underprepared, and the Prime Minister has no backbone. He doesn't know what he thinks. He has to ask other people to give him his opinions. We have a naval base in Bahrain that is there for minesweepers, for British minesweepers. There are no British minesweepers in that naval base. We've been completely caught asleep at the wheel, and the Prime Minister has to step up in the interests of Britain.
Okay, well, let's just listen to your leader, Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the opposition. Let's listen what she had to say about President Trump.
The words coming from the White House are completely wrong. I think it's actually quite childish. There is a lot that can be said behind closed doors. We've got President Zelensky in our country today. The Western alliance having an argument with itself, I think, sends the wrong signal.
Fred, what do you say to that? Kemi Badenoch has been incredibly supportive, actually, of President Trump, but even she now is saying that his words are childish.
Well, I think we have an operation that's been fairly successful here, and I also think that President is about to wind it down because we've achieved our objectives. The next phase is to stand with the Iranian people and try to support their efforts to overthrow this government. And I might add another point concerning the attack on the British base in Cyprus and attacks by the Iranians or just about every country in the Middle East. These missiles were pre-positioned. Iran was prepared to attack UK bases and every nation in the Middle East. I mean, this nation is a regional threat. This threat was simply going to grow. By the end of this year, it would have amassed a missile shield that would have made it impossible to take preemptive action against its nuclear program. Is this a perfect solution? No. We can't do this through the UN. So arguments that, well, this is a violation of international law. How can we stop Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons through the UN? Is anyone in the program, do you have an answer to that?
Stephen?
Yeah, of course, by dialogue and discussion, just like President Obama did and President Biden did. You know, Benjamin Netanyahu has been trying to get you guys to go to war with Iran for decades. Everyone else has said no, but Donald Trump was daft enough to say yes. And now the entire region is a complete mess, and it's having an impact upon all of our lives. That is his responsibility alone, and he needs to now fix it.
Fred?
Now, I think we know right now that the nuclear deal that Obama negotiated was a fraud, that Iran was cheating on it. It was enriching to 60% uranium-235 during the Biden administration, despite Biden's efforts to appease Iran to get a nuclear deal. Don't tell me we could negotiate away this nuclear program. The Iranians are liars. They've never negotiated in good faith. I regret that this was the only solution to this program.
All right, this is where the whole argument really starts to fall apart. Because once you actually dig into what was said, it just doesn't hold up. I was going to break this down step by step, but I can't let that claim about the Obama-era nuclear deal slide. Calling it a sham sounds bold, but it skips over reality. That deal had a clear purpose: limit Iran's nuclear activity through strict inspections and international oversight, and for a time it was doing exactly that. Inspectors were in place, restrictions were active, and the situation, while not perfect, was being contained. But instead of acknowledging that, we get this rewritten version of events where diplomacy supposedly failed completely and military action becomes the only real solution. That's not a small claim. That's a massive shift in narrative. And then there's this pattern we keep hearing. For years, it's been the same warnings on repeat. They're weeks away. They're months away. The threat is immediate. And yet those timelines never seem to actually land. The urgency is always there, but the follow-through never quite matches the claim. At some point, you have to question whether this is about facts or about building justification. Then there's the moral side of this, which got brushed aside far too quickly. Civilian casualties in any conflict aren't something you just shrug off as unfortunate. That's exactly why international standards exist in the first place, to draw a line, even during war. But instead of addressing that directly, we saw a deflection, a pivot, a return to familiar talking points. That's not accountability, it's avoidance. And when you zoom out, this isn't just about one argument on a TV panel. This is about the bigger picture. Actions like this don't just affect one region, they ripple outward. Allies start questioning things. Trust starts to weaken. Coordination starts to break down. You can already see that tension building because when decisions are made without clear alignment or strong diplomatic backing, it doesn't just isolate your opponents, it can distance your allies too. That's why voices pushing for diplomacy stood out here. Not because they're perfect, but because they're at least acknowledging that there were other options, and that escalation comes with real consequences. At the end of the day, this isn't just political theater. These decisions shape global stability, alliances, and real lives. And when those arguments finally get challenged properly, like in this clip, you start to see very clearly which ones can hold up and which ones fall apart under pressure. So now I'll throw it to you. What did you make of that exchange?